Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to another episode. The title is Multiple Objects in One Reality, or Multiple Realities in One Object. The idea for this episode really arose when I wondered about the question, is the world just an object? I can tell you that is the first question. You know, sometimes there's this thing that says answers close worlds, questions open them. And so when we're wondering if the world is an object, we're wondering if we are an object. Because our understanding of the object is dependent on us. That means the same way we give words meaning, similarly, the object has meaning to a source, to an intelligent source. Like Friedrich Nietzsche says, you know, if a tree falls in a forest, does anyone hear it? If there's nobody there, did the tree fall? A few questions I wrote for this episode. Could the world be receiving more than expressing? Can two moments of conception be compared? And the last question is really the title. Multiple objects in one reality, or multiple realities in one object. Let us begin by saying that we open our eyes in the world. We don't know if we are the world or we are in it yet, but we open our eyes, you know. As we move in this world, you can say a self emerges. That means even when the person is born, there is a physical self, the physical birth. The existence of the child enters the system of reality. And we can say, after the child, as Jacques Lacan says, the child, there's a mirror effect. The child sees itself in the mirror and notices, okay, that's me. That first me arising, I would say that is a non-physical sort of birth. It's a non-physical separation. You can say it's the moment where when the child looks in the mirror and it's like, oh my God, that's me. That's the moment where an object establishing itself as a subject. So what I'm trying to say is an existential world and an experiential self. Multiple objects in one reality is a suggestion of different worlds in oneself, we can say. You see, it's one side of this self-to-world relationship. That means what's life, self plus world. Now, if the self is a subject and the world is an object, where this is how we're considering it in the mainstream. We're in one world, but we have different selves, different birthdays. Every day the person wakes up feeling it's a new day, new self. So either the world is one phenomena and we are the multiplicity. The multiplicity is in our inner realms. The world is just singular. Or we are singular. The self is singular. There is one self, and the world is an illusion in its transitory nature. So you can say when the child is born, world, selves, senses of self are adjusting to a world. But when it comes to the mystic's eyes, for the first time, the self is being attempted to seen as unchanging. And I feel both the multiple objects in one reality and multiple realities in one object, it is simultaneous, it is in accordance to if the attention is focused on the inner realms or the outer realms. In the outer realms, one object, the inner realms is the multiplicity of it. In the inner realms, you are one subject and you experience a world in your conscious waking state, a world in your dream state, da 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 da, you know? Abstraction comes and goes, it's the context to the day. A metaphor I've used in a couple talks before was that I said there's two types of multidimensionality. There is a type of multidimensionality where it's one cake divided into a bunch of pieces, cut up into different pieces, or it is different cakes in different dimensions. Either one dimension is cut up and divided, classified, categorized. In the outer realms, the multidimensionality is different worlds. In the inner realms, the multidimensionality is different selves, senses of self. If there was a way to move in the inner realms, it would most likely be through self. That means when I think about what has been changing in my inner realms, the focus hasn't been a world. That means because we feel we're a small part of this big thing, the self sticks around. As long as there's a body separate. Anytime there's something small that's in a bigger system, it's as if its position is defined by its existence. In the outer realms, really, I'm looking at a red robin on a tree. I'm in Toronto giving this talk, and I could tell you, this bird is just existing. When I look at my outer realms, it's just here. Existence is here in front of our eyes. But behind our eyes, it gets way more mysterious. Behind the eyes of the person, attention comes into play. Attention is not a relationship with an object, and you can't even conceptualize it too much because the concepts are found within the attention. That means if the person has a philosophy on the experience of their attention, then it is not their attention. The philosophy is the content in the attention. What that means is, imagine the attention is like a camera, and you're like a cameraman looking from behind this camera, like a camera. And as you're seeing this, as you're looking through this camera, what's moving in front of the camera is not the camera. Attention doesn't have a location behind the eyes. Awareness is being like the whole moment. That means the moment we localize or we want a location, let's say you've closed your eyes and you want to be in a location. You know, the mind is like what comes natural to it is effortless. What is unnatural to it, there comes a lot of effort. So if the person becomes acquainted with the nature of their attention in a natural way, I would say it is effortless. I think it's a very important question that we begin taking the multidimensionality of our realm in our own domain of experiential responsibility. That means people have been responsible for existence. What does that mean? That means, let's say there's a knock on the door, you open the door to see who's there. Do you know? That's a sort of being responsible that something happened in existence and the person followed it up. Now, so much phenomena occurs as a mind. That means the issue is not that there isn't intelligence out there, and it's not that intelligence is hiding from human eyes. It's just that human eyes cannot see beyond human eyes. Language denies the truths of other dimensions by making us feel in this dimension we know it. Based on the multidimensionality of the system, the information's certainty can be justified. That means if we're living in a, let's say there's, I don't know, I mean, in one of my, in a science fiction novel that's still unpublished, but I'm working on this giant science fiction novel. This, there's 9 parallel realities of Earth. And all the Earths are conscious through one government. So one government based on one parallel dimension of Earth is administering all the other parallel dimensions of Earth. In my science fiction novel, that government in the year 5025 is called the Enlightened Society. Just a society of, just a group of enlightened beings, super chill beings trying to just build everything to its ultimate position. So if there are, the more worlds there are, the more questionable the certainty of one dimension is, of one world is. And this is the reason I'm giving these talks. If there was no such thing as imagination, if there was no way I could doubt myself, then I wouldn't be giving these talks. There would be even no question. You see, that's the thing about some answers. It's like all questions and answers are ideology to some degree. Now, the issue is, if the answer is taken seriously, the person may not change. So an ideology starts possessing and living your life for you instead of you. What does that mean? That means, imagine a child who was young had very angry parents, and the angry parents always told the child to be quiet. Don't talk, don't speak, kid, don't. You know, and the kid's like this young kid overwhelmed by an intensity it can't comprehend. This child is feeling quiet. Now, this child goes to different places, different parts of the world, you can say, and totally years pass from that moment, but this child doesn't speak. It is strangely quiet. Years of its life is passing. Even moments where the child wants to speak, but it sees it can't. Because the ideology of youth got imprinted with a sort of emotional acceptance of the world. Children don't have analysis. They don't have that much of a proper ability to articulate. And if they do, it is rhythmic in accordance to the fun they're having. You know? So if the child cannot process reality, it still has to give evaluation. I remember myself as a child, there were so many things that now I know, back then I didn't know. And because I didn't know, the emotions I had for the world, upon the world, were filling the gaps of meaning of stuff that I had not looked at. And I got angry at it one day. I can say I got angry at the life, at the many opportunities of life that I didn't dare to live. And that's the thing. We have to realize we're mortal so we can think straight. And to think straight means to realize you're not a thought. You're just a dwelling attention as a moment of being. This is the simplest way we can say it. That means, imagine the person came to talk about class. People were like, no, equality, don't say anything. The person came to speak about color. Oh my God, no, don't say anything. Then the person came talking about creed. And then they're like, no, don't say anything. And eventually the person's going to be like my fellow energetic beings. Like, it's like my fellow energy, you know. Based on how we define a dimension, we then find an access to define the multidimensional. If we feel there is no such thing as multidimensionality in a world this vast, one can say the way the species has defined what a dimension is the error, is the issue. We have accepted ourselves too soon as just an objective appearance and a subjective sound. When I think about the meaning of dimensions, it has to be an approach of division and divide and conquer. And so it's like there is something cutting the cake. Whichever dimension you're in, there is some force in nature that is not satisfied. It seems like it's not just man attempting the eternal, it is everything. It's as if existence has a yearning, a hidden yearning, to experientially break through the shell of its former position. They say if a snake doesn't shed its skin, it dies. And so, if the snake sheds its skin, it is no longer the same snake in the outer realms. What that means is, of course, human beings are not snakes, but I'm saying, like, we have to change the ideological outline of our life if we want a permission beyond the repetitive. You know, just like a tree has roots in the soil that we can't see, sight has its roots in space, which matter cannot see. And to treat ourselves as space means to treat ourselves as if it was never there. And out of 8 billion human beings, how many human beings do you think they can find a moment where when they look at reality, it's as if they were never there, in the sense that nature was here first? Because that's one thing all human beings will do. They will meet the end. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you do, this is a temporary system. And by the nature of being temporary, there comes the ultimate calling of the day. That every day is an opportunity, aside from the inner realm satisfaction, so much to do in the outer realms. I hope we reach a point as an advanced civilization where, rather than wondering if there's multidimensionality or not, we have been incredibly comfortable with multidimensionality. We see that we have been, as creatures, trained. You can say just the concept of language, the different languages that are in the world, they have been training the behavior of an animal. I would say the way a human being became aware of language, human beings in the evolutionary scheme of things, I would say it was equivalent to stepping into a portal or meeting an alien. I feel, I remember writing even, I'll tell you. So guys, again, an unpublished science fiction work, it's called An Alien Named Language. And I would say this is by far one of the most incredible sci-fi future outcomes of Earth I've seen. So I'll tell you the story. I don't remember the year I said it. I think it was 2000 something, 500. Maybe it was way beyond the time now. And Earth had become a black rock. What that means is human beings had failed on Earth. And so Earth was no longer inhabitable, this chemical, as if like we polluted Earth so much that we couldn't live on it. And so how the story goes is that the Earth, before that giant mistake that the Earth's surface was no longer habitable, there were magnetic sky cities, specifically magnetic sky cities holding the civilization in the air, in the sense that the magnetic sky cities could never land. That means people in the sky cities could never die, technically. And that means they could never fall. The sky city could never fall, but it could never leave the atmosphere either. And so what has happened in regards to food and all, nanotechnology had evolved to that degree. What I mean by nanotechnology is that the human beings had found a way to endlessly create food. So why is the book called An Alien Named Language? Something like that. Oh man. This sky city, magnetic sky cities in this timeline, in this sci-fi universe that I've designed, what is happening is that it's run by a king dash general. That means this general, who was a general that was there when the sky cities were lifting into the air, he's maintained himself as a general, but then he's become like the leader, and the people wanted him to become the leader. So he's literally like a man in a military uniform, but he's sitting on a king's throne. And so the story begins, and in these sky cities, this general has a son, has this young son, and if this was a movie, you'd probably see like the young son coming out in the middle of like recess or break from the school, and looking down at the black earth, looking down at this earth that has been burnt, that has been ruined. So what happens is this general king is in his council with different people there. He's sitting on the throne, and suddenly an alien lands. And in this story, I thought of trying to communicate to the reader the first time that perhaps an alien contact scenario can happen. And this alien appears into the room. This alien that is kind of like a glowing morph suit, The alien appears into the room, and for a second scans. I don't know how I wrote it. The alien scans, and he looks at the king, and the king is shocked. And he says, I have come to enlighten your whole civilization and graduate you guys to a galactic thing. Something like that. The general is shocked. The general says, what should we call you? The extraterrestrial, this is where the title comes from. The extraterrestrial that has scanned them, scans the moment and says, your mind, your species has not surpassed language. You can call me language. And the alien names itself language. And what happens is this alien, which has come to enlighten everybody in these sky cities, the king, the general king, suddenly looks at the alien and says, before you enlighten everyone, enlighten my son. And so what happens is the whole book is just this kid asking this alien questions, a son of the general. And the son asks questions like, how many people are alive on Earth? The alien scans and says there's 7 people, but they're so savage and bewildered that they can't integrate into your societies. And different kinds of answers. But my whole point in writing that was to say that language is an oddity. I would say it is the first alien contact. The first extraterrestrial. That means you look at everything on this planet. Everything. Animals speak. You see different animals speak. Like birds, if you listen to birds, they're kind of like, they just give signals and wait. They just chirp and wait. There's so many mysteries here. I can't believe people feel like, when I think about education, really, like, it's only for a purpose. That means if there was no economical sector, do you know, why would people want knowledge? Do you know how many people would not go to universities if they didn't need a sort of education? How many people truly go in to actually see a study for the merit of the knowledge alone? As if like, what does all this mean? You know, not a lot of people question the whole moment. Because they fear if the answer is different than their emotions, they have done wrong. I can tell you, even from in my youth, religious ideology was around. And I can tell you that this may be one of the strangest arguments from a theological context, but it's this idea that if man thinks he has to do something aside from being what he naturally is, it's as if it's a doubt of God's perfection from the beginning. That means as if the Creator didn't know what it's doing, so it needed instruction. You see, it's a field of minds. What that means is when we became subjects to ourselves, the object for the first time could move in different ways. You know, on some level, I sit here, and if let's say an advanced extraterrestrial species was like from stealth surveilling human activity, they would be like, all right, this guy's just sitting somewhere making mouth noises. That means when I look at it existentially, what is the value on what I'm doing? I'm just a creature making sound, generating sound. But when I look at, when I bring the subjective self into place, when I consider a sort of concept-context relationship, a sort of self and world relationship, then the domain of speech activates. That means you need the first, it's like the person needs a microphone in order for their voice to project, in order to speak, let's say, to an audience. Similarly, we need an I thought to see the world in different ways. If we identify with separation, unity is only left. If we identify with unity, our whole life we're going to try not to be separate. And in the middle of this, we are forgetting that it's a natural series of events. That means, I don't know how many people have wondered about this, but what if we are the thoughts of nature? What if man is like imagination? What if the world is an antenna? And what is human activity is a signal? And if the world is not an object, that means if the unknown surpasses material truth, because when I look at it, there is no material truth. Matter, the world is just a massive movement. It's a grand occurrence. But the inner realms, the mind, seems to be watching the movement. And because it's watching the movement, it's not just the movement, it's the space where the movement is happening into. Okay. Now, let's say we entertained both these possibilities of multiple objects in one reality, multiple realities in one object. What does that mean? That means it's like there's one body, there's different minds, there's one mind, different bodies kind of ordeal again. So I would say 8 billion creatures on a rock want to build an advanced civilization. Their inner realms give them access to multidimensionality first, then singularity. The outer realms give access to singularity first, then multidimensionality. So that means both these have to be mastered. That's it. That means instead of the person thinking of failure or success, the person should say, how many versions of this experience have I attained? So we need to have an ability to utilize. That means if we have outer realms, pretty much there's something to do there. You know, if we have inner realms, perhaps there isn't something to do there, but there's something to be there. So if there was training for this, the person has to practice being comfortable with their subject of the moment changing without the outer realms changing. That means in front of your eyes, one event, one existential event. You know what it is? It's like I'm an object right now, wondering how I'm being a subject, pretty much. Now, as I'm wondering how I'm being a subject, the object-based component to the moment is very clear, it's very evident, and it's kinda, even though on a very micro level everything's changing, but it's kinda static enough to be like a picture. So I can tell you that visibility matter is part of the spectrum of intelligence where there is less change. So we can say, instead of thinking there is even outer realms or inner realms, we can even say there's this sight and there's levels of speed. That means what we say is matter, it's a speed. It's the speed of some movement. What we say is the mind, it's a higher speed than this. What we say is the soul is even beyond. We can say the soul is the truth that is faster than the speed of light, if it is beyond form, which is seen through light. I've given a talk on this. People can search it, but I created this concept. I called it the eventum. I notice in the outer realms, we are considering we're made of particles, an atomic structure in existence. Now, when it comes to the mind, I've wondered often if the mind was an object, what would it be made of? Do you know? And I noticed that we have disconnected psychology and the sciences, simply because the terminology is different and there is no leniency. The scientific mentality is not going to consider, you know, the multidimensional and the limitless, because if it does, it has to entertain uncertainty. And the only option is left is that psychologists have to find a new set of language, pretty much, to be able to connect, like a bridge builders, between human behavior and emotions and narrative to scientific thinking. That means for the first time, I would say, scientific context, science is becoming a sieve for the imagination. Now, the issue was the language. So for the language, I thought about this and I'm like, what is the smallest unit of the mind? the smallest thing of that the mind is made of, and I notice it's an event. And then I realize the T at the word event and the T of the atom can be the same. So I created the word eventum. And I thought that it makes sense, because if you see the psyche as an eventum, as one event, and you see this event is made of smaller events, that means who is speaking to you right now is not just who I am in this moment, but it is the accumulation of all the memories of whatever I've journeyed so far to be here now. So if we were to think of an eventum, so, and even I created the term eventron, positively charged. It's all in that talk. You guys have to look up. But pretty much the closest we can get is psychology is subject object, science is object subject. And it depends. I mean, there's this difference between continental philosophers and analytical philosophers. And the analytical philosophers did something great. Not great, I would say, something diabolical, that they made the definition of the continental philosopher change. So they actually, like, I could tell you the analytical, if you consider, I mean, of course I'm saying this playfully, but if you were to perceive a sort of war between the analytical philosopher, which is the objects first, then the subject, and the continental philosopher, where it's the subject first, then the object, and their language has more of an unknown position, I can say the analytical philosopher zipped the mouth of the continental philosopher. The moment imagination was in some sense ridiculed, and there was no other way, because inevitably it would have happened. You see, that means it's like in there. It's like, how can I tell you? Like, I honestly feel the creature that we are, the Homo sapien, it is like a technology that we have only so far, with whatever progress we claim, discovered maybe 12% of. That means there is 88% of human potential inactive. Okay, I would like to read for the audience an essay that I wrote in 2017. The essay is called, I'm going to read a series of essays right now. This is again an unpublished work that I wrote. It's called The Source of Language. It's just a collection of essays. So anyways, A Young Mind for an Old Soul is the title of the essay. Who are you beyond the names of your subtle, abstract, and imaginary acceptance of reality? Is a truth seeker still seeking how real and unreal experience is? For how long do Zen masters need to think they are butterflies dreaming? The great beacon of cosmic existence has already been lit. We are just emanations of a great light of intelligence. How does love attract to itself what it wants? Are desires speed bumps on the path to self-realization? To want anything from a changing world is to suffer to see that once you get it, it too will change. Do you think every day you have the same thought about yourself, or are you refabricating reality in response to environments you're entering in and out of? Your memories dance into reality. Presence is the secret that personality will never be able to capture. The native Indians taught us to communicate with nature well, and as the Sufis whirled into ecstasy of infinite bliss, the beloved was the one dancing. Could one instant remind you, you are the infinity in the finite? Loving yourself means loving others, for your sense of self is adjusting itself based on how you see others. Therefore, the seer of thought is beyond the thought's design. There is no need to reject or accept realities. Bask in the omnipresent bliss of the self, and just watch the beauty of life happen within eternal, selfless, and absolute glory. Do not forget the sun is in your eyes as much as you are in its eye. Light is a love letter. Is a lo- Light is a love letter that only self-inquiry can open to full fruitive realization. You are growing with all that is. Could still language ever suggest who you truly are? Turn the page of thought and acknowledge the blank page that is this universe's life. The source of all bright minds are the same. Language at most is a divine mirror to a timeless knowing irrelevant to any comparison. Discover the truth that all that is already being. The Logos never went anywhere. You are the reflection of the absolute greatness in the mind of man. Only a man without the shoes of thought can feel the bare surface of the earth, of the creation that he walks on. Abide in the self that has always abided with the universal flow. Language is a transcendental lift-off platform to the one and only true being. You are no secret when your consciousness is pervading through all that you're aware of. Some people feel ashamed of their loneliness. However, some mystics are enlightened by it. The story of the prophets was always a beautiful one. The divinity of life permeates through death too. We are all cosmic puzzle solvers, but the ocean does not need to be too concerned about the shape of the wave. Just like how many different gold statues share the same essence of gold, everything within a moment of being in existence shares the same intelligent essence as the moment of observance and awareness. When you are beyond words, how can you be defined? My dear actor, perhaps it's time to step off stage. Perhaps it's time to step off stage into your direct experience. The next essay is called The Satsangs of God. Satsang is it's a Vedic term. It means pretty much like a conscious gathering. That's what it means. The Satsangs of God. So it's the 27th essay. The title, it begins. What is free is a moment prior to the word free in quotations having to mean anything. So one can say the true essence of freedom seems to be the awareness sparked by a direct experience already being. The words, in quotations, direct experience are beautiful, and what it simply implies is that conceptually you're wondering about how direct experience is defined, but suddenly realize whatever you consider is being directly experienced and is happening, but suddenly realize whatever you consider is being directly experienced and it is happening right now. The witness is present. Every moment manifestation is allowed in your range of attention. Beyond that sphere, the unknown is too unknown to be known. The search stops and the moment adjusts itself in its natural state. The natural forces of this world cannot go ignored. We are one collective cosmic organism that cannot just be defined by an individual part of it. The beauty of self-realization is the awareness of the unattainable within all that desire's grasp is trying to attain in an endlessly, infinitely changing universal void. The simplicity of silence allows the complexity of speech. Divine lips shall move once the self realizes itself within all things and beings. excuse me. To continue, guys. What can ink of an empty what can ink of an empty page communicate that your moment is not already being? The mind structure is how a multiverse was a universe. Next step until the emptiness, divine fulfillment guides itself. Um, where was I? All wondrous meanings are collectively maintained. All of life is at best all about abiding in the self. How are you speaking about time? The desire of thought is a non-existent projection. The heart of desires is filled with instruction. The beauty of human existence was always now. Suffering can only be removed when the externalized attention of your true nature is internally rediscovered through the emptiness of all ideology and the destined fulfillment into the divine by the divine. Who is the witness and can the eye, oh my God, who is the witness and can the mouth do the work of the eyes? Is the source of language void to a present multidimensionality? What weaves existence into place is a hand beyond individual reach. Who am I? The I is not a who. What the Satsangs of the God suggest is that there never was an individual person who heard truth. The world spins as one. Time and space are unnecessary separations in the void of the seer. Very few have found an inclination to go within and discover their true nature. Those who have are guided by cosmic grace, for what keeps the veil of illusion is belief in duality as the first stepping stone. The mind is a projection of a self. Perhaps that is why we say, my mind, in quotations. So the self is beyond the mind, and the mind fundamentally has relative meaning based on the definitions of language inspired by the changing current environment. Ideology can never replace your true nature, which is beyond thought. Rather than trying to find an unknown heavenly union, wonder how you are separate from existence. Are you separate from existence? Life and death are not crops evading the sight. The all-pervading superconsciousness and the soul of souls must be acknowledged from within. Become sincerely desireless for a day, and you shall be enlightened by night. You will look at the sky and see yourself one with the stars. You will bow to starlight as it has bowed to you. You will stop the games of the mind and language, and you will abide in your true self that is beyond the judgment of others or yourself. Your breath is the link that allows heaven and earth to dance in your eyes. Conscious breathing is key. The Pure Lands have become your lungs. We are on a rock spinning in the middle of space, among a billion trillion stars, and we somehow exist being able to ask questions about our source. Evolution is so divine, it's unbelievable. Many systems shall crumble as the truth never needed help. All guides have guides. There's much to say, but very few that can be said. As new lanterns of vision are lit up within you, that absolute activity that is how manifestation moves is incomparable due to the dynamism of change and natural shifts in your attention. Are you a concept or a collective phenomena that is your whole moment beyond distraction? I remember a time when I sat on a rock in the middle of a stream, and as the stream moved past me, I wondered where is existence heading. It took a while, but it suddenly dawned on me that the existence I see changing can't be the only existence, for what existence is aware of changing existence? God is an interesting word, but heaven's arrow was always pointed within. I noticed, in quotations, I, who was a part of existence, feels it can move. But does the entirety of existence move? Does the, in quotations, here and now ever go anywhere? Many smirks have bloomed once language has stopped and intuition has been reborn as always being the guidance of the oneness of all that is. Does truth have orbiting orbits? A king sheep once adopted an abandoned lion. A king lion once awakened the sleeping sheep. Once the celestial lion that you are looks in the pond, it will roar to remember its true nature. Man's nature of mind is similar. Beyond ideas, we are free and freedom itself. We are like one light being reflected off many mirrors of reality. The essence of our pure intelligence is something to be remembered and nothing to be learned. Language can be elusively cruel, but not the presence of the universe. Life lives for life. Behind misty clouds, you are the radiance of an open sky. That face in the cloud, that face in the clouds is a new and unique view in each of our minds. Whose face are you seeing? Who can be their self and see everything else? And the essay ends. When there are multiple objects in one reality, that's kind of like there being consciousness as a singular source where everything is related to. So I would say multiple objects in one reality or multiple realities in one object, the perfect metaphor. One thing that I would like the listener to take away from this is that it's like a circle, you know? And so if the conscious, let's say the attention identifies with the center of the circle, it is multiple realities in one object. And multiple objects in one reality is the circle. So so imagine the center of the circle, then we draw an arrow, and then we draw from the arrow the circle around that dot. And so we have three components: the radius and the center and the circumference of the circle, right? So the circumference is the awareness. The circumference is universal intelligence, which is collective. The center of the circle is an individual object. That means, isn't it fascinating that all we know is within an object, technically, if we consider the brain to be the projector of reality? To the mind, it is the center of the universe, to the consciousness. But to the body, it knows it is not the center of this world. So behind our eyes, we are the center of meaning. In front of our eyes, we are like the circumference. Behind our eyes, we are like the dot, the center dot. And it's fascinating that there is never just one axis of duality. There is multiple. That means just like how I can see a system being unknown and known, that's one dualistic axis. Then I add another dualistic axis. Let's say I add simplicity and complexity. So that means I now can see a system that is known and simple, unknown and simple, and vice versa, and all the probabilities. So the more axes, more dualistic layers of meaning you add to a moment, the more probabilities of it you can find. So I would say, like, I use this technique in my artwork, when I draw, is that sometimes I add chaotic elements. That means I draw something in a very nice and ordered and organized way, then I add just chaos to the page, you know. And there is something that this is actually fascinating. If you in I would say, as someone who's, let's say you're drawing with a pen and you want to draw some I don't know, precision level stuff. If you want to draw straight lines, out of experience, the finger should be closer to the tip of the pen. If the person wants to draw long, curvy, natural curvy lines, they have to come and hold the pen from the top of it. You know? So based on the intent, the utility is recognized. You know, like, I hope we see the day where even, let's say, in elementary school, where young children are being taught arithmetic, you know, they're being taught very basic numbers, 2 plus 2 equals 4. Like, I hope we see the day where the teacher comes and says, let's say there were two portals plus two portals. How many portals do we have? The concept becomes advanced, the concept of discussion. You know what's interesting? No living human being on this planet has ever been seen before. That means every person alive is a new dimension of the realm. So technically, the inner realms of every living conscious creature, if you have consciousness, it's like you can contribute to the advanced civilization. For greater stories for mankind means greater stories for all intelligent phenomena in the universal sector. And you know, I have thought, really, Shintoism, I'm going to bring this up, Shintoism it inspired me to think of a sort of metaphysical relationship that could potentially be happening in the behind the scenes of nature, in the sense that in Shintoism they see all matter, all stuff, as a vessel for a highway of souls. So literally, there's souls passing through this coffee cup in front of mine, if I was like into Shintoism. So I was thinking about this relationship of course, Rene Descartes also brought up the mind-body dualism, mind being in its own dimension and the body being in its own dimension. And I thought, what if this is what's happening? Where we are energy, and energy cannot be created or destroyed, but it changes from form to form. So the purpose of experience is change, and interestingly, the purpose of existence is to remain. You know, it's like the universe seems to be very similar to two brain hemispheres. One brain hemisphere is endlessly creating, one brain hemisphere is endlessly destroying. One brain hemisphere is endlessly releasing, freeing the shackles of the past, and one brain hemisphere is keeping the shackles on. And so really, if we perceived a fractal nature, that means any living human being, and fractals is a concept brought by a mathematician named Mandelbrot. And it's pretty much like a mathematical representation of as above, so below. So if reality is fractal, it would technically mean endless minds. It would mean infinity is what the universe is made of. Infinite movement. You know, this was the idea, my comment on the metaphysical thing, that it's like I thought, what if we are people now, when we die, we become mind. And so what is happening is that it becomes a waiting zone for energy. And so based on how the future generations evoke concepts, it's as if, you know what it is? It's like, think as if there's a bunch of people with blindfolds on, and these people with blindfolds, they have to reach the end of like this race. Okay, and they're all put in random places, right? Now the whole point is these people can't move with these blindfolds until crowds of people who they can't see come and guide them. So let's say there was a crowd of, let's say, I don't know, 500 people, and there were 5 people with blindfolds, and 100 each person. So each person with a blindfold, 100 people are assisting that person. And imagine those 100 people had to push that person with the blindfold and pull that person with the blindfold to get to the destination. So we are human incarnation, I would say, manifest incarnation, is literally like us being that blindfold. And I had this view where, as if when we leave, we become like right now, we are self in world. The other side of the coin is world in self. So we become the worlds of other selves. But now we are selves in worlds. This is why if we choose to see the world alive, it is literally a fractal, similar to a fractal remembrance of self. You know what I would like to see? Human beings all over the planet, 8 billion human beings. We start having discussion circles, but I would say it in a different mindset, that we playfully entertain this idea that every human being so far, after people were focused, obsessed about object worship, we've gone into idea worship, and language has slowed down in its evolution. That means language has won. That means people don't feel they can surpass the language that is the emotion they feel they want to have in the moment. You know, I would say for human beings to live as minds, we have to treat the mind as if, like poetically, it's a temple that you got to take the shoes of ideology off. That means when a person takes their shoes off, they can't say, "You don't know what it's like being in my shoes." Do you know? Because they don't. If we can step out of our shoes, that means we could have always never been in them, technically. And either man puts an effort to consciously harmonize and administer the environment, or the environment tries to pull man to his old ways. Before I land the plane, I'm going to share a story. There was this man, the sage, in the forest. He was sitting, cultivating inner peace. He had sat there in the forest, and his inner peace had grew to such a point that eventually 500 disciples gravitated towards him. And these disciples would all sit in the forest, and all these people would just cultivate inner peace and, in some sense, wonder about life, not just in the most complex ways of satisfaction, but a sort of resolution to the desire through simplicity. And these people sat, these 500 disciples of the sage, there was one of these disciples, and the sage would say different tasks, even, let's say, physical practices, meditations and whatever. And there was one of these disciples that, in whatever circumstance happened, whether there was a fight between the disciples, whether there was anything, this disciple was smiling. Just this, and not this just simple smile, you know. And in the story, he's known as the smiling disciple. And nobody knows why this guy is smiling except the sage. Only the sage knows why this guy is smiling. Suddenly, the sage wakes up, and one of the disciples comes up to the sage and says, "Winter is coming," you know? And what happens is, I forgot to mention this part. There was a king also in the story, and this king was so occupied and had so much pressure and stuff the king had to do, that he wanted some wisdom of some sort. And so when the king realizes these sages are, the sage and the disciples are there in the forest and winter is coming, invites the sages and allows them to come and stay and have food and everything. And the king the whole time is thinking, all right, I'm going to get some time free and go talk to the sage and see what's up, you know. The sage and the disciples, they stay in the palace and winter ends and they're about to leave and the king hasn't had time to come and see them. Suddenly at the end the king arrives and the sage is about to leave and the king says, Sage, you're an old man. Don't go back into the forest, stay back and be my counsel and send your disciples off to the forest. And the sage sees he's pretty old and he's like, okay. Yeah. And the disciples go back, and the sage looks at the smiling disciple and says, you lead them. And the smiling disciple and all the other disciples, they go back into the forest, and the sage stays with the king. And years pass. The smiling the smiling disciple and all the disciples, their inner peace grows. And the sage helps the king and whatnot, and things go by well there. One day, the smiling sage, after many years, decides to go and see the smiling disciple. Goes to see the sage, wants to go see the sage. The smiling disciple goes, and he's there sitting in front of the sage in the palace, you know, and drinking tea. They're both drinking tea. And meanwhile, the smiling disciple just says, oh, what happiness. He sees the sage has become old and he just says, oh, what happiness. Oh, what happiness. And the sage is talking. Now what happens is the king walks into the room. The king walks into the room and of course the sage is too old to get up. And the smiling disciple is just sitting there. And the smiling disciple doesn't get up, doesn't treat the king as if he's like nothing. He's in the palace of the king. Back in that time, you know. And the king, his ego kicks in, and he's like, "What is this?" He's like, "What is this crap?" The king feels dishonored, and he's like, "How dare this man not show respect to a king?" You know. The king walks up to the sage and says, it seems that your disciple has sat here for so long and has no discipline and has done nothing that he's become foolish, and he's saying, oh, what happiness, oh, what happiness. And in the middle of this, the king is saying this to the sage. The sage just raises his hand like halfway, like, stop, something like the sage says, king, there is something you don't know. And the king is just pausing. The sage says, king, this man, he points to the smiling disciple, he says, he too was a person who once sat on a glorious chair, who once had armored guards escort him. This man in front of you, the smiling disciple, he used to be a king. And the sage says he used to be a king, he renounced that lifestyle, went and found true peace, inner peace, and sorry, that's it. He's found true inner peace now, happiness, true happiness. And the king just stands there shocked that there is so many levels beyond what we fathom as even the highest level. Anyways, guys, I hope this episode was helpful. Is the world an object? It can't just be an object. If it was an object, there would be no intelligence. We define objects as inanimate, but we are an animate phenomenon. We can say we receive the world as an object. I would agree with that statement more, that we receive the world as an object, but it doesn't mean it's an object. Some people feel like this was the whole simulation theory, where Elon Musk was sharing it interestingly, where he said there's 1 billionth of a chance that, imagine like gaming companies, the video games become so real, so real, so real that they become indistinguishable from reality. And so the idea is, what if we are in a simulation that is indistinguishable from reality? So that's the thing, it's like the moment we see the unknown, there's space for endless theories to arise. But if we see the known can't be really technically theorized, it's just instantaneously known. Immanuel Kant has this term, he says noumenon. That means in front of your eyes, what's happening is phenomenon. Behind your eyes, what's happening, it's a noumenon. It's an event that the experiential witness within can only see. Anyways, guys, I hope this episode was helpful. Much blessings and namaste.